I'm texting her, what do you want me to get? The government can spy on me all day, unless tomatoes is code word for grenades or something, which is not true. So some people are very concerned about this because what happened and did start to happen in America is you did start to have racial profiling to some degree with people of Arab descent. They're being looked at strangely because of the Muslim Arab connection with Al Qaeda, since pretty much all of the Al Qaeda people that flew the planes were basically from Saudi Arabia and Egypt. Okay, so there was suspicion. Another thing that happened too as a result of all of this is the United States government put together this brand new agency called the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security now is basically dedicated to notifying Americans of terrorist threats. There is a scale that they, with colors that denote what the threat levels are. So red is like extreme threat. Yellow is not extreme threat. Blue is like, well, there's no threat. It's kind of like fire danger. You know what I mean? They changed rules at airports. Okay, and if you've ever taken a plane before 9/11 and after 9/11, you know that there's way more security, right? I literally saw an old, blue-haired, 90-year-old grandma with a walker in Dallas's airport, and they took her to the side and they made her spread her legs out and put her arms up and they patted her down. They did the wand. I was surprised they didn't do like a cavity search on this lady, but I'm thinking, wow, yeah, there's definitely security. I on numerous occasions before they even implemented the new rule about on airplanes about what you can bring. For example, you can't. You guys maybe know this, but you can't bring water bottles on the plane unless you fill them up after you get through security, right? Like you can't do that. So I mean, like I personally have had to drink my water to make sure, because who knows, it might be nitroglycerin in there. Take off your shoes, right? Because shortly after 9/11, there was a news story about a guy in Boston, the same airport where Al Qaeda flew out. The guy was trying to light a match on his shoes. Okay, so I mean, like the hysteria that developed about terrorism and fear and stuff like that really was big. Didn't affect me that much, but then again, probably affected other people. But I think the biggest thing that we all have to deal with now as a result of this is just airline security, right? And did you know that even now, as a result of the Department of Homeland Security, there are federal marshals that ride on airplanes with guns? That must be Homeland Security, right? Who would break into Fresno City College at 4? There's nothing here except paper and people, so whatever. But yeah, it's just another one of those things. And in 2003, to take the doctrine of preemptive striking, to its nth degree, the Bush administration decided that this was a good time to go after terrorists and what they termed as the axis of evil. The video did a decent job of explaining this, but let's go more in depth. You had Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which, by the way, who was left there after the United States got into the Gulf War in 1990? President Bush, then President Bush, Bush Daddy, he had the opportunity to kill Saddam Hussein on numerous occasions. Not he himself, but the military. And they did not kill Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Why? Why would you not kill an evil dictator, even though you could? Money? What? Ooh, war could, maybe they might be mad at that. I don't know. Yes? Well, you guys know the story about Iraq. Iraq has like 3 different ethnic groups in it. I think all of you guys are right to some extent, but there's 3 different ethnic groups in Iraq that hate each other. Okay? When they drew up the borders for Iraq after World War I, they had no idea what they were doing. They said, this looks like a good boundary, because they were British. This looks like a good boundary, yeah. Yeah. Pass me some tea, will you? Let's do that. And they put together Sunni Muslims, Shiite Muslims, and Kurds. All 3 of these people hate each other. So, Saddam Hussein is an evil dictator, yes. Is he mean to his people? Yes. Does he carry out human rights abuses? Yeah. But what's worse? Getting rid of Saddam Hussein and letting these people have a civil war? Or leaving him in there with a very oppressive military regime to keep everybody under control? President Bush, from 1990, President Bush chose option B. So Saddam Hussein was allowed to continue his reign of terror. Fast forward to 2003. You've got the beginning of 2003 and a report that Saddam Hussein is building weapons of mass destruction. What are weapons of mass destruction? Well, they're weapons of mass destruction. You can kill many, many people with them. You're looking at nuclear weapons, but in this case we're talking about biological and chemical weapons. Does anyone in the room know what biological weapons are? Yes. Exactly. Man-made viruses that could be released and kill people without damaging the buildings. Yes. Chemical weapons. Chlorine gas, mustard gas, stuff that Syria is using on its own people. They say they're not, but yeah, whatever. They are. Everyone knows it. And so it comes out in early 2003 that Saddam Hussein has these weapons, and the case is made to go to war to destroy Saddam Hussein's regime and to bring it down in what is called Operation Iraqi Freedom. Okay? What's interesting about this war, the weapons of mass destruction they're talking about, in part came from the United States in the first place. In the 1980s, as Iraq was fighting neighboring Iran. Yeah, we gave him those weapons. It's insane. Now we're going to kill him for having those weapons. Saddam Hussein is like, we don't have any weapons of mass destruction. We don't have that. But yeah, whatever. Some people think that President Bush and the conservatives in Congress were seeing their public approval ratings go down, so they needed a war to bring them up. That's the conspiracy out there. And 3,000 Americans later that are dead, Iraq is marginally more stable. Of course, it didn't take long for the United States to win this war. But the question is what happens after the war, and that was the big issue. So there was a report that was made after this event that questioned whether or not Saddam Hussein even had weapons of mass destruction in the first place, and so there's always going to be a debate about that. Al Gore contends like, hey, if I was president, yeah, we wouldn't have been in Iraq in the first place. So, President Bush famously got on the deck of an aircraft carrier and declared mission accomplished, when the mission was far from accomplished. And as the war in Iraq continued, And it continued all throughout 2003, all the way up until basically nearly the end of his presidency. Whenever you're a president and you're involved in a war, you guys, that's the one thing about American history. If you're involved in a war that's not going well, and it's not, remember what happened in Vietnam? When the U.S. government got on television and said, hey, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and then the Tet Offensive happens. Yeah, right. We're not light at the end of the tunnel. Mission accomplished? Yeah, right. America's still there. So, over time, the Iraq War will serve to hurt President Bush in the future. And one of the reasons Iraq was just so difficult was because of the continued insurgency. And what that means is the ethnic groups that are fighting in Iraq were fighting back at us and against each other. And American soldiers here, as you can see in Baghdad, were caught in the crossfire. You might have friends and relatives in Iraq. You might have friends and relatives that died in Iraq. This was a very polarizing thing, just like the Vietnam War was, right? I mean, you had people on both sides saying, that we're doing the right thing by being in Iraq. Then those were probably the conservatives. The liberals were saying, no, we got to pull out. And then you had people in the middle who might have family over there and stuff. So wars are very political sometimes. But the interesting thing is, as time goes on, there kind of develops a sort of an anti-war movement, and eventually getting out of Iraq will become a campaign promise of Barack Obama. This is kind of funny. Star Wars is, quite frankly, the greatest film ever made. May 25th, 1977. Excellent film. This movie, of all the Star Wars trilogy, is absolutely horrific. I think it's horrible. But it's supposed to have something to do with the Bush administration. This came out in 2002, I remember. But Mad Magazine put on a parody of the war in Iraq. So here you go. See if you can enjoy this. I don't know. This is called. I know. Gulf Wars, Episode 2, Clone of the Attack, instead of Attack of the Clones. And Mad Magazine did a really good job here. Now, you would think the Bush administration would be very much anti-Mad Magazine. And it'd be like, oh, you're making fun of us and ripping on us. But what's funny was they ordered a ton of these posters to put up in the White House. They thought it was just genius. They put it up. It was a true story. But it's kind of funny. You can't even see it, but basically down here it says, reprising their roles from the first Gulf War, the first President Bush, Colin Powell, there's the first President Bush, and eventually it says the Phantom Menace, Osama bin Laden. Okay. Great fun. If you guys want that, just Google it. I like the Yoda and Dick Cheney. I think that is perfect. That's one of the coolest things ever. Yeah. Natalie Portman, Condoleezza Rice. Oh, man. So fun. Well, the Democrats were really hoping that Bush would, the frustration level with Iraq would boil over into electoral win for their candidate, which was going to be John Kerry and John Edwards. John Kerry currently, you guys, is our Secretary of State. But they put up a good fight. However, the Bush and Cheney ticket won out from 286 votes to 252. A little bit more than in 2000. Now, in this election, Florida was also key. The Democrats were really banking on that, and of course it didn't work out. But this just validated the fact that Bush and Cheney were going to win and be there for 4 more years. Now, there's a number of things that happened during Bush's second term which really sink his presidency, and I think one of them is this: Hurricane Katrina. Who remembers Hurricane Katrina? Okay, You probably watched it on television, right? You saw the images